Okay, so good morning, everybody. Good morning, Venerable, and welcome back to Impermanence and the Four Foundations of Mindfulness. And whenever you're ready, I think we can get started.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here again. We're going to do day 2 on impermanence and the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Before we start, as I explained yesterday, and I'm sure you all know that, then it is very good to adjust our motivation. And then after adjusting the motivation, we'll take refuge together, and then we'll go into the teachings. So for the motivation, you just take a minute to recollect your thoughts. And I think, Sheila, you have your mic still on, which has a, yeah. So when we recollect the thoughts, what we do is we try to take all the thoughts that are clinging to the future, that are already running away from where we are right now. We bring them all back to the present moment by focusing on our body. And all the thoughts that are still hanging in the past, trying to digest what happened to us, and not completely clear what to do with what happened to us. We also ask them to come to the body. And if it is difficult, we can just promise that part of our psychic that at a later point in time, we will come back to that. And so all the thoughts that are in our mind are focused on the here and now. They're focused on the present moment. They're focused on the body. And then from that mindful place, we can set up a good motivation, or we can adjust our motivation. And we can think that by listening and participating in this session, we do that not just for our own sake, not just for our own happiness, but whatever benefit comes from being here today, that might be of greatest benefit to everyone around us, to all sentient beings. And so if we want our actions to be of greatest benefit, then what we think is that our actions, they are going to contribute to achieving our highest wisdom. Our highest wisdom mind is the mind of Buddha. And so in order to reinforce that, we take refuge. When we take refuge in the Buddha, we remember that we also take refuge in our highest potential, in our own potential to become a Buddha. When we take refuge in the Dharma, we also take refuge in all the activities that we are doing in order to develop that highest potential. And when we take refuge in the Sangha, we take refuge in all those who are supporting us, but also in the person that we are going to become once we have achieved our highest potential. I'm going to ask Sheila to put on the Refuge Prayer. And we can read it together. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Thank you. I'm trying to close the chat so that I see some more people, but I don't know how to do that. Let me try this one. Oh yeah, I can see it. Yeah. So before we go into the teachings from today, part of the teachings of today is a little recap from yesterday to refresh our memory and, to all the things that we spoke about, to condense it so that it becomes clear from how we go to the next step in the teachings from today. So yesterday we looked at where we can find the 4 foundations of mindfulness within the sutras and also within the Mahayana teachings. And in general, we can say that the Satipatthana Sutra is mainly practiced in the Theravada tradition. They take the words of the Buddha quite literally. And so they put into practice the practices that are exactly described in the Satipatthana Sutra. And within the Mahayana, we might think, but we don't do this, but that's not completely true. We might not practice in the same way. We might not do the walking meditation and the lying meditation and the standing meditation. But within the Mahayana, we practice definitely the 4 foundations of mindfulness. They are described in the practices of a bodhisattva, which are shared with hearers and solitary realizers. And the only explanation that I have found, that I have come across in my study, was the explanation that is found in the Ornament of Clear Realizations, or the Abhisamaya Alamkara. And there it is written in the 4th chapter. So the 4 foundations of mindfulness, they are listed there as part of the 37 practices harmonious with enlightenment. And these are the 37 practices that a hearer or a solitary realizer, which is someone who strives for their own enlightenment, what they need to do in order to achieve enlightenment or their liberation. And yesterday there was a question that somebody said, these 4 practices of mindfulness, are they from the Eightfold Noble Path? So I put all these 37 practices on a sheet of paper, and I'm going to ask Sheila to share that. I hope you got that. We had some technical difficulties before the session. Oh, here they are. Yeah. And so the 37 practices harmonious with enlightenment, we can see, and the wording is a little bit different, but the essence is exactly the same. We see the first 4 are the 4 establishments through mindfulness, or the 4 close placements of mindfulness, which are the 4 foundations of mindfulness. So they're all called mindfulness, but as we saw yesterday, they're not just mindfulness, they're actually mainly wisdom. These are minds that focus upon 4 objects, but when they focus, they start to investigate the nature of these objects, or they start to investigate the specific and the general characteristics of these 4 objects. And so then if we scroll through it, and we don't have to name them all, but I've highlighted all the places where mindfulness is named within the 37 practices harmonious with enlightenment. So if we go a little bit up, then within the 5 faculties, we see on place number 15, there is mindfulness. And then within the 5 powers on place 20, there is also mindfulness. And then in the 7 branches of enlightenment on place 23, there is mindfulness. And then on the Eightfold Noble Path, there is on the final last place also correct mindfulness. So mindfulness is not just one thing, you know, mindfulness, we can see that in different contexts. And then it has a different meaning, or it has a different strength, or it has, you know, for instance, the correct mindfulness is based on the whole noble path, which is a different mindfulness or a different quality of mindfulness than the mindfulness that we practice when we practice the 4 foundations of mindfulness, right? Don't ask me to explain all the details because I do not know. But what I do know is that when we look into the path of a bodhisattva and we start looking at where does the bodhisattva practice this, you know about the path of accumulation and the path of preparation. Have you heard of this? Yes. So the 4 close placements of mindfulness, they are, or the 4 foundations of mindfulness, they are practiced on the path of accumulation. And some writers say on the small path of accumulation. So that is the first third of the path of accumulation. The 37 practices harmonious with enlightenment, they are practiced from entering into the path of accumulation up till the path of meditation, even by the bodhisattva. Right? So it is not, oh, these are simple practices, they're just for the hearer. The bodhisattva practices them throughout the whole path, and they might be a little bit different in the way we practice it, you know, but what it is mainly about is that we achieve that same quality in our mind stream, right? How we do that within the context of where we have an affinity for, but the qualities itself, they are not different. Right? I assume, I would think so. So the characteristics that we contemplate of the 4 foundations of mindfulness, they are very much related to the Four Noble Truths. And in the Theravadan tradition, practicing the Four Noble Truths, or contemplating the characteristics of the Four Noble Truths, is seen as the path to liberation. So here we have a little bit of a difficulty, I think, with if we look into the Mahayana tradition, because when we look into the teachings of the Four Noble Truths, and therefore also in the teachings of the 4 foundations of mindfulness, then, and we take the teachings as they are given by the Buddha, then we would have to say that cannot lead to liberation, right? Because according to the Mahayana tradition, or maybe I should say in Tibetan Buddhism, or maybe I should say according to the Prasangika points of view, just realizing the impermanence of phenomena, or just realizing that there is no self-sufficient, substantially existent self in the mind stream, or in the body, in the person, that is not enough in order to achieve enlightenment, or in order to achieve even liberation. Right? Have you had teachings on this? Is that familiar for you? Yeah. So then what the Prasangika would say about the Four Noble Truths, they say we need to interpret the Four Noble Truths. So although the Buddha didn't say it directly, if these teachings are suitable to achieve liberation, then what the Buddha actually meant to teach is that when we investigate the aspects of the Four Noble Truths, and we think about the general aspects of phenomena, then we think about the emptiness of inherent existence. And in dependence on that realization, we can achieve liberation from samsara, and we can achieve enlightenment. So that is how we can get around that. So yesterday we looked at the first foundation of mindfulness, which is the mindfulness of the body. And there are several ways of contemplating the mindfulness of body. We did a few of them in the meditation. But if I summarize that, we can, for instance, meditate on the different parts of the body, the outer parts or the inner parts. We can meditate on the different structures of the body. We have the muscles, and we have the blood vessels, and we have the nerves, and that kind of things. We can also be mindful of the posture, or we can be mindful of the movements that we make with the body, or we can be mindful of the breath. So the body gives an amazing amount of possibilities to meditate. And then looking into even the course impermanence of the body by contemplating our own death, or how the body looks like after death. And so we can also look at impermanence by thinking about the change that is happening over time, which is the change that we can see with our eyes if we really look with our eyes. Or we can think about a change that happens moment to moment in the body. Right? So there are incredible opportunities to meditate on, to practice mindfulness, but also to meditate on impermanence. And every time that we meditate on the impermanence of the body, we get more grounded in reality. Right? Somehow our mind assumes that things are more permanent than they are in actuality. And so the only way to counteract that is to get in touch with that reality and to observe that reality. And every time we do it, we counteract that holding on to permanence that we do automatically. So we break a deep, deep-seated habit by connecting with the body, by connecting with the breath again and again and again, and investigating what we are seeing, investigating what we are feeling, bringing the mind to the senses, not just, I'm feeling, not just feeling or not just seeing, but you want to investigate. You want to investigate the reality of what you are seeing and feeling. So having done that, we're going to look today into the foundation of mindfulness, independence on the feelings, the mind, and then the fourth one, which is phenomena. And then we focus specifically on impermanence. And so yesterday there was a question, somebody said, when we practice these foundations of mindfulness in every day, do we experience all these four at the same time? And I think these foundations of mindfulness is not what we experience, right? These are a foundation that we use in order to observe an object. So for instance, my body is a foundation that I can use to observe my internal organs, to think about my internal organs. The body is the foundation. When I close my eyes, I can't even see my own body. I might feel my own body, but I think about what is going on in my body. So the body is then the foundation. It is not the thing that you really focus upon, but it is the basis for your focal object. So then we do not really experience all four foundations at the same time. If we think about mind and cognition, it says there that the mind is focused, can only focus on one object at a time. The mind can only hold one object at a time. We can hold one object and then in the next second another object, and then in the third second another object again, and then we have the impression that we can focus on all the objects at the same time. But in the mind, that doesn't happen at the same time. All right. So the second foundation of mindfulness is the feelings. And so when we are going to be mindful of the feelings, what we are doing is we're going to observe whether our feelings are pleasant feelings, unpleasant feelings, or neutral feelings. There are actually only 3 possibilities. So that seems to be quite easy. It's not so easy to focus on the feelings. But for instance, when we eat something that we like, chocolate cake or pizza, that might be pleasant. We have pleasant feelings arising in the mind. Or we hear a dog barking very loud and we experience that as being unpleasant. And then there might be also feelings that, we feel things. For instance, I put my feet heavily on the ground. I feel the connection between the ground and my feet. That might be a neutral feeling. If I don't think this is either pleasant or unpleasant, we can call that a neutral feeling. And so when we observe the feelings, we can also think about, is this a bodily feeling or is this a mental feeling? Or we can think, is this a worldly feeling? Is this connected to the senses? Or is this a feeling that is not connected to the senses? For instance, if I have very blissful experiences in meditation, that is not a worldly feeling. So we can distinguish like that. I think for us, thinking about pleasant feeling, unpleasant feeling, and neutral feeling is more than enough, because there is a lot of juice that we can find when we're really going to look into that. So when we start focusing on the feelings, when we place our mindfulness on the feelings, we are engaging in the second noble truth, which is the true origins. By observing the feelings, we can see that when pleasant feelings arise in the mind, it is immediately followed by attachment. And when unpleasant feelings arise in the mind, immediately they are followed by aversion. Right? It is written in the scriptures. It is an automatic reaction that we all have, which is very difficult to get away from until we realize emptiness, So for a long time, we can use this in our practice. Don't use it in the sense that you think, oh, I'm going to change that reaction. I'm going to make sure that when I feel pleasant, I don't have attachment anymore. I don't think that is realistic. Attachment will be there, but we can find a different way of relating to that reaction of attachment. Right? So when we look into the 12 links of dependent arising, then we know that craving and grasping are the 8th and the 9th link of the dependent arising, the links of dependent arising, right? And that is what causes for us, that is the cause for us to take rebirth again and again. So where does craving and grasping come from? It comes from feelings. When feelings arise in the mind, there is a craving and grasping, and that craving and grasping ripens the seed for a new rebirth. Right? So if we find a way to not engage that intensely in the craving and the grasping, we can do a lot in influencing our karma. So once we see that the craving is induced by feelings, then we will generate a wish, I want to really abandon the craving. The craving is what makes that I go again and again. But then, of course, we can also say, where does the craving come from? The craving comes from ignorance. It comes from the first link of dependent arising. And that ignorance is the holding on to a self. Holding on to a self as being inherently existent, right? So in order to completely eliminate the craving, we need to realize that the self does not exist inherently. But until that time, we can work with the fact that pleasant feelings cause attachment to arise in the mind, and unpleasant feelings cause aversion to arise in the mind. And so we can work on the fact that we don't just go blind for it. Every time an attachment arises, we run after it and we think we want to indulge in it because we think it's going to make us happy. So we can have a look at how from the feelings, the craving and the grasping comes and what that does, how we create karma. And so I'm going to ask Sheila to put on that second sheet that I sent you. So the mindfulness of feelings, we have at the left side, pleasant feelings that arise in the mind, and at the right side, unpleasant feelings that arise in the mind. And then from these pleasant feelings, we have attachment that follows, craving for more pleasant feelings. It is actually, we want to hold on to these pleasant feelings. We do not want these pleasant feelings to go. We want more of it. And when unpleasant feelings arise in the mind, aversion follows. And aversion says, oh, I don't want to feel this. And aversion tries to separate us from these unpleasant feelings. And so in dependence on that attachment and aversion, we engage in an action under the influence of that attachment and aversion. Attachment and aversion are the delusions, right? And we know from when we studied the 10 non-virtuous actions that the motivation for non-virtuous actions comes from a deluded mind. A mind that is either deluded by attachment, by aversion or hatred, and by ignorance. Right? So when pleasant feelings come and we follow, an attachment follows, and we follow that attachment, or we engage with that attachment, and then we engage in actions under the influence of that attachment, we engage in actions that are going to cause suffering for us. Right? We think we want to have more happiness, but we're actually creating more suffering. When unpleasant feelings arise in the mind and aversion comes as a reaction to that, and we follow that reversion, like, oh, I really cannot bear this, I don't want to feel this, or whether it is a headache or whether it is something that you're hearing outside that you can't bear, then you engage in action. You go outside, you start shouting, like, can you please be a little bit more quiet? Then we do this in order to be separated from that unpleasantness. But by doing that, when anger arises in the mind, when aversion arises in the mind, we actually create more suffering for ourselves. True. Sometimes we have this illusion that the suffering is, thank you, Sheila. I think that was it. Sometimes we have the illusion that the suffering becomes less due to aversion, right? Maybe we have worked up ourselves so much, and then we go to the beach and we start screaming, and then we come back and we think, oh, that was great, so relieved. But then what we do, for instance, we start creating a habit that every time when I feel worked up, I need to get out in order to scream because I cannot deal with this feeling that I have inside. And so then we create a habit of releasing that kind of energy. So then we create a habit of having to do that. Right? According to Buddhism, that's not a skillful means. Same with attachment. When we follow attachment, attachment says, I want a little bit more, I want more. one more. And we keep following, I'll have another coffee and another coffee. And tomorrow I have another coffee and I have another coffee. And we think this is giving me happiness. And temporarily there can be a pleasant feeling coming from that because we have a good connection with, or we have the karma to experience coffee as being something positive or something beneficial for us. But then when we start looking into the day that we cannot go for that coffee, what happens? The not getting the coffee can drive us nuts, right? And so that means that we have become dependent upon the coffee. And as long as the coffee is there, we have the illusion that we're doing quite fine. But when the coffee is not there, then we can really see what has happened to our mind. We can really see the condition of our mind, right? The best condition is that whether there's coffee or not, it doesn't matter. I can enjoy the coffee, but if it's not there, it's fine too, right? But if we have the need, I need it to feel happy, we have kind of a problem, right? You might say, as long as I can get it, it's not a problem, which is true. But if you look into the long term, wanting to benefit your mind, then especially if you think about wanting to practice Dharma, all these attachments and aversions that we experience in relation to our worldly life is actually what can become our obstacle to practicing Dharma. And the less aversion we have to not having something, not having comfort, not having the pleasures of samsara, not having praise and fame, not having people around you who tell you all the time that you are so fantastic. If you can be with that, and if you're fine with that, then the mind is very easy and relaxed and is not going out to get something because I need something, but the mind is free. And when the mind is free, I can use all my time and energy to practice the Dharma, right? This life, the pleasures of this life are not so important then. Okay. So how do we do that? We have these feelings arising in the mind, and then we have a reaction. And so what the mind normally does is the feeling arises and the reaction comes straight after that. And then we keep following that reaction. We keep identifying with that reaction. That reaction is more easy to feel than the feeling that caused that reaction. Right? When I have a pleasant reaction, then I become sometimes aware of that pleasantness because my mind is craving for something. Or my mind is going after something. And so when we follow that mind, we create the causes for suffering. And what we can do in order to counteract that mind is that we say, I'm not going to follow the reaction, but I'm going to go back to the feeling. When pleasant feelings arise in the mind, attachment follows. And what attachment does is attachment says, I don't want that feeling to go. I want that feeling to stay in my mind. We try to hold on to it and we do not let that feeling dissolve back into the mind. Right? We think that that is going to give us more pleasure. But in actuality, we numb our pleasure when we do that. The craving is there, and the craving is just is somehow taking us away from that pleasurable feeling. So what can we do with this? When a pleasant feeling arises in the mind and craving comes, or the grasping mind comes, or attachment comes, we can say, oh, I'm just going to enjoy this pleasure. And I go back to the pleasure and I fully enjoy it. But I fully enjoy it, but I also allow it to go. Once it is finished, it's fine, it's gone. So then the feeling arises in the mind and the feeling can dissolve back into the mind. I'm not holding on to that feeling. When I do that, the pleasure that I experience, whether that is independence on the senses, whether that is independence on my mental continuum or my mental consciousness, the pleasure is so much bigger, so much more intense. So we have more pleasure when we do that. When unpleasant feelings arise in the mind, aversion comes, right? And so what aversion is doing is saying, oh, I don't want to feel it. I don't want to feel it. Aversion tries to push the feeling down. What feelings do, feelings are impermanent by nature, right? So feelings, they come up, they grow to the highest peak, and then they dissolve back naturally, right? That is the normal flow of feelings. When unpleasant feelings comes and aversion says, oh, no, I don't want to feel it, then that feeling cannot reach its highest peak. The feeling gets stuck here somewhere, and so the feeling can never dissolve back into the mind. And so I can push it back, but the feeling will keep pushing because its nature is, I want to fully be felt before I can go back into the mind. Right? So what we do when unpleasant feelings come and we see the aversion and we see the irritation or the anger arising in the mind, we say, what was that, what I was feeling? And we go back to the feeling and we sit with that, and we say, oh my gosh, this is so unbearable, but we feel it, we feel it, we feel it. And eventually it will just dissolve back into the mind. Right? If we can do that, we also don't engage in actions independent upon aversion and attachment. So we create much less negative karma. And so sometimes, you cannot catch yourself with the feeling, but you know that something is going on. So you can then start observing your behavior first and you say, oh my gosh, I'm, what do I do? So for instance, confession. So for instance, sometimes I notice that I'm not cleaning my kitchen. And I notice that after 2 days and I think, what's going on? Why am I not cleaning my kitchen? And then I think, that's self-care, right? My self-care is not there. What's going on? And then I have to sit. And then there is always an unpleasant feeling that I cannot face that makes that I start to do this kind of behavior. Then when I sit with the feeling and I allow it to arise, after that, I can just get up and do whatever I need to do, So in this way, we can use that technique. Okay, let's move on because to the third foundation of mindfulness, which is the mind itself. And so what we can do when we meditate, we don't meditate on the feelings, but we meditate on whatever arises in the mind, whether that is attachment or anger, whether that is another type of delusion, whether that is loving kindness and compassion, whether that is concentration, whatever aspect arises in the mind, we watch that arise in the mind and dissolve back into the mind. We think about its impermanence, Sometimes when anger arises often in the mind, we believe I'm an angry person, right? I'm such an angry person. Oh, there it is again. You see, I'm an angry person. But anger is just a mental factor. It's just a quality of the mind that arises in dependence on causes and conditions. And maybe you have the karma to meet certain causes and conditions again and again that are very unpleasant for you. And so then anger arises. And when we contemplate that anger arises in the mind and dissolves back into the mind. It arises in the mind, it might stay for a little bit, and then it dissolves back into the mind. And we see its impermanent nature. we can see that whatever arises in the mind cannot stay. Whatever arises in the mind will naturally dissolve back into the mind. There is not one thing that can stay in the mind, nothing. Because the nature of whatever arises in the mind is impermanent. And so when the causes and conditions are finished, it will naturally disappear. It will naturally dissolve back into the mind. Right? So by doing that, what we do is we actually start to weaken that identification that we have with certain qualities that arise in the mind. Oh, I'm always so distracted, or oh, I'm so obsessed, or we can start observing the distraction. We can start observing the obsession, that it is not me who is that, but it is a quality of mind that arises and dissolves back, independent upon causes and conditions. Which also means that when we change the causes and conditions, the way or the frequency or that these qualities arise in the mind will change, definitely. Right? So if we are struggling with something, attachment, anger, whatever, when we start observing that, and then we start seeing that it is not me who is angry, but that anger arises in the mind, that it is not the mind that is angry, but it is just it is due to conditions that this quality of mind arises. And then I could think about what is underlying the unpleasant feeling, and so it is not me who is that. It is just something that comes and goes. When I start to learn how I can step back from that, we become so much more easy. Then when anger arises in the mind, we do not necessarily have to follow that. We do not have to become that. We can just see, wow, this is agitating my mind. We can see the agitated mind, but we don't have to act upon it. And so when we place our mindfulness on the mind, then we engage in true cessation. This is what it says in the Satipatthana Sutra. So I'm going to ask you a question about that, because what it says is that when we see that the mind, certain states of mind are produced and they then also cease, so they exist only momentarily. When we start seeing that, what we see is that there is no self-sufficient, substantially existent self. There are just states of mind that come and go. There is no self. Who is that? There is no self who is doing that. There is no self who has to be that. There are just states of mind arising in dependence upon causes and conditions. So by doing that, we can realize that that self-sufficient, substantially existent self that seems to control the mind, or that seems to govern the mind, or that seems to live somewhere in between our aggregates or within our aggregates, we can see that such a self does not exist. And so in the Satipatthana Sutra, that means, so that causes liberation. So my question to you is that true? And I do not know how much background knowledge you have.
Not true.
Not true? Tell me why.
I think you said it in the beginning of the class from the Prasangika viewpoint. It is not sufficient to just have that realization that there is no self-sufficient, substantially existent self for liberation. For them, you need to even realize the selflessness of phenomena, of the basis itself, of the aggregates, in order to be liberated.
For the Prasangika, so if I realize the lack of a self-sufficient, if I realize, how did I say that? The selflessness of phenomena is that a phenomena is empty of being the object of use of a self-sufficient, substantially existent person. If I realize that, am I liberated from samsara? You know,
Yeah,
right?
I always get confused with the terminology. So the way I have remembered it for myself is to say that for Prasangika, you have to realize the lack of intrinsic existence of everything, self
Yes,
and all phenomena. And if you
that's
can
true.
do that, then you can be liberated and be enlightened.
Yes, yes, yes. So even in order to be liberated, we need to realize the lack of a inherently existent self. And we need to realize the lack of inherently existent body, which is the lack of inherent existent phenomena. We need to realize that both to be liberated from samsara and to achieve enlightenment. Right? That is one of the unique points of the Prasangika. So all the other schools, they all hold on to inherent existence. Right? And so then most schools, they say, when you realize the lack of a self-sufficient, substantially existent self, then you're liberated from samsara. You're not necessarily enlightened, but you're liberated from samsara. So then they say, when we meditate upon impermanence and you do that and you see the impermanence of your 5 aggregates and you see the impermanence of everything that arises in the mind, then you realize there is no self-sufficient, substantially existent self, and that is going to liberate you. So we need to add something to that practice if we want that practice to become a cause for liberation. Right? We need to really focus on the lack of inherent existence. But, you know, already realizing impermanence is already fantastic. Right? That's already such a realization that makes life so much easier. We are so not in our own way anymore when we realize impermanence. Great. Thank you for that answer. Very good. So then the last foundation of mindfulness, which is the mindfulness of phenomena. And what we mean with the mindfulness of phenomena is that that refers to all mental factors except the feelings. So we investigate mental states, and then we investigate whether they are wholesome or not, whether they lead to suffering or whether they lead to liberation, whether they are harmful or whether they are helpful. And so in the Mahayana Buddhism, we say that we need to realize there are phenomena that are called the phenomena belonging to the thoroughly afflicted classes, which are all the phenomena that keep us within samsara. And we need to know all the phenomena of the completely pure class. These are the phenomena that help us to achieve liberation. And so when we know which phenomena are contributing to samsara, holding us into cyclic existence, and when we know which phenomena are going to help us to be liberated from samsara, then we can practice the thoroughly or the completely pure class of phenomena. These are the practices, the realizations that when we develop them, that they are part of the path towards liberation. And so when we then apply impermanence, then we can think that, you know, whatever arises independent upon causes and conditions. The mind of a Buddha, the fully enlightened mind, has arisen independent upon causes and conditions. It's not coming from nowhere. It doesn't arise randomly like, you know, a lucky person had from the beginning the mind of that was fully enlightened. Right? Even the enlightened mind was once a mind full of delusions, full of ignorance. And by recognizing what increases the ignorance, what makes that we hold on to our bondage to cyclic existence, and what helps us to be liberated from that, we can start practicing that. And every time that we practice something that helps us to achieve liberation, we are producing the causes for liberation. Right? So impermanence, we can think about things arise in dependence upon causes and conditions. Things are changing on the cause level. Things are changing on the momentarily level, moment to moment. Right? And so that we can apply in the different situations, whatever suits us best. For me, when people started to say the mind of the Buddha arises in dependence upon causes and conditions, I was like, what? And it gave me the kind of insight like, wow, that means that everyone can achieve that. When we create the causes and the conditions, we will achieve that. I don't know, for me, that was an insight, like, because you can sometimes have the feeling like, yeah, maybe some people can achieve that, but not me, not me. I have something in me that's just not going to happen. But once you realize, but if you just do the causes and conditions, it's going to happen automatically, even if you don't want to. Right? If you really hard don't want to achieve enlightenment, but you create the causes and conditions, it's going to happen. Cool. Are there any questions? Yes, Abelardo.
Thank you. Well, I have several, but I think the main one here is what I had learned is that, and this is based on Nagarjuna, there's the self-grasping ignorance, and then there is the self-cherishing attitude, which is more cognitive. It's therefore impermanence is not enough. Just the awareness of impermanence. There's also the developing the wisdom of emptiness to eliminate those deep cognitive seeds, roots that sustain the delusion of the existence of a permanent self or I. So my question really would be your view on the relationship between consciousness of impermanence and the need to still work on wisdom of emptiness.
I think in terms of the nature of things, we can talk about, we hold on to a permanent nature of things, due to the way that the mind works. And in order to counteract that, we meditate upon impermanence, but then we also hold on to the inherent existence of things, right? And the inherent existence, and one quality of inherent existence is that we see things as being permanent.
Right.
Meditating on impermanence doesn't help to make that, I think, to make that conception of inherent existence even less strong. It is not an opposing force against inherent existence, holding on to inherent existence. But what it does is, when we hold on to permanence, when we think about impermanence, what we do is we let go of a lot of ideas about ourselves and about life and about the way that we engage in actions. We change a lot. And so it gives a lot of possibility to create positive karma. It gives a lot of possibility to not identify with anything that arises in the mind. It gives, therefore, a lot of potential to counteract our delusions. And so the mind can become more clear. And that is a wisdom mind that arises. But that is not the wisdom mind that can realize the lack of inherent existence. For that mind, we need to develop the mind that can see, first then we need to understand what inherent existence is, and then we need to generate a mind which is totally opposite to the mind that holds on to inherent existence, right? And the essence of inherent existence is that we see something as independent of anything else, right? It's not and that automatically is permanent, but it is not the permanent feature that makes that we see it as inherent existence.
Right.
It is more the independence from anything else that makes something inherent existence.
Right. So we have to practice the wisdom, achieving wisdom of emptiness. Right?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
Otherwise, we can't get out of samsara.
Yeah.
Yes. But starting with contemplating impermanence is a very good beginning.
Yeah.
You at least create a lot of space so that you can then practice and contemplate the wisdom that realizes the lack of inherent existence.
Yeah.
I think you create good conditions in the mind.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Yes, you're welcome.
And my other question has to do with the Tibetan Book of Dead or Natural Liberation, where it talks about the 6 bardos, the 3 bardos of when we're alive, and the 3 bardos after death. I know there's a lot of practices that have been developed on the basis of this. I'm just wondering if you're aware of this and how they might relate also to the practices of mindfulness of the impermanence of the body and the other levels. So, like, for example, in the bardos, when we're alive, we practice on the daily experience, on dreams, and try to develop capacity of lucid dreaming, and on meditation. Those would be the 3 areas where we see how the mind's mental states are not permanent. For example, we prepare for our physical death, but also we're prepared for what goes on in the bardos after death. Yeah.
Is this what we practice in when we do Heist Yoga Tantra, or is this something else that you're talking about?
No. This is an independent practice. I guess it can be done in Tantra, but it's independent from Tantra. It's based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead.
Right. I don't know. But I think when you start doing practices related to death, and then when you talk about, I'm going to observe my dreams and I'm going to use lucid dreaming, you're working with the different subtleties in the mind, right? You have the coarse mind, you have the subtle mind, and you have the extremely subtle mind. And
Right.
that these minds and working with these levels of mind is very important within the death process.
Yes.
And it's also going to help you with rebirth. Does thinking about impermanence help us with that? I think thinking about impermanence and practicing mindfulness in relation to the impermanent nature of things help us to have a less deluded mind, have less delusions in the mind. When there are less delusions in the mind, it is more easy to concentrate. And when it is more easy to concentrate, we can get to the more subtle states of mind. Right. So by removing layers of delusions, we actually can go to these subtle states of mind, and then we can start working with the subtle mind. And so that is then what we can use for these practices that you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm just going to bring a book to share with the group that I think could be very, very interesting. I'll be just 1 second, if that's okay.
I see that Jennifer also has a question. Let me have some more people.
Should I just ask, or should we? Yeah. So thank you so much. These are so helpful teachings. Oh, I don't know if I believe
Okay, show us the book. Okay, we come to Jennifer. Show us the book.
Mind Beyond Death
Yeah.
by Dzogchen Dunlop.
Right.
Yeah, it's
Interesting.
an excellent book. Published by
Mind Beyond Death.
Mind Beyond Death. It's published by Snow Lion.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
My pleasure. Thank you for the good answer.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Yes, thank you. My question, it's sort of a two-part question, but it's related to how we approach progressing from the realizing a lack of a self-sufficient substantially existent I to a lack of inherent I. And so first, I'm just wondering if you would recommend that, gradual approach, like maybe impermanence, then self-sufficient, then inherence. And then, regarding inherence, any practical tips? Like, would it really be just trying to meditate on like the sevenfold reasoning or the king of reasonings, like in the meditation? Or are there ways to make it a little more experiential? Or also, what do you think of like Dzogchen types of, and like Mahamudra and Dzogchen types of practices, which are quite different in their approach?
Yeah, so the Dzogchen and the Mahamudra teachings are actually the most advanced teachings that we can have, right? So if you say, let me start with that because that is more easy, it actually is not true. It's not true. They're the most difficult, unless you have done it a lot in your past life and you have such an affinity with it that you feel like, well, that is really speaking to me and somehow I just know how it works. Let me go to your question. Do we want to build it up? I think when we start to engage in study, meditation, practicing the path, we will never first realize the lack of inherent existence before we realize impermanence. The realization of impermanence is before we realize the lack of inherent existence. So in terms of realizations, there is a path, We have the Lam Rim, which is the path of the stages of the path to enlightenment. They have a certain order. If you want to start at the end, you cannot realize anything fully from the end unless you have the full realizations of that all come before that, right? So then in terms of the self-sufficiency, essentially, I don't think that we say, now I'm going to first realize the lack of a self-sufficient, substantially existent self, because I need to do that first. But I think when we start to study, for instance, Jamyang, and we learn about emptiness, and we apply the reasoning, and we think about it, and we debate it, and I think that realization comes naturally. I don't think we have to do that. I think it is a result that just comes from engaging in the study and the reflection and the debate, right? And then maybe if you need meditation, you can, that also can be the one that is going to help you. I heard that Lama Yeshe, he realized emptiness on the debate ground, debating on the self. And that at a certain point he got it, and he just stayed in meditation for a very long time. And so we don't even have to go in formal meditation necessarily in order to realize this. So I think whether you like it or not, even if you start studying the lack of inherent existence, right? In that study, you talk also about the self-sufficient, substantially existent self, and I'm not sure if it talks, it also talks a little bit about impermanence. So I think if you engage in the study of reaching the highest goals and all the other realizations that are coming before that, there somehow will appear at a certain point in time.
Thank you so much. And maybe just a quick follow-up question to that, because there are some teachers who I respect a lot, like Lama Alan Wallace, who really emphasizes more of the direct path, like the Dzogchen view. And they, I don't know if I can't say they minimize the Lam Rim, but the way they're presenting it, they're really encouraging students to, go there, even, they need a solid foundation, but it seems the timeline is a lot more compressed compared to some of our other teachers. And I'm wondering if you might have thoughts about that.
Well, when you have the imprints for that, you can do that. Right. But if you don't have the imprints, then it's not going to work. And I think Alan Wallace's teacher, he said that the Dzogchen was going to be the fantastic practice for this time and age, for degenerate times. I'm not sure why that is. Dzogchen seems to be a very easy practice. I don't know. I can't say anything about that. I'm glad that in this life I met the Gelugpa tradition. And I'm not a study person, but somehow by studying, I can see that so many wrong ideas have just disappeared out of my mind. Mm-hmm. And I would not have been able to do that with Dzogchen, right? I needed to hear the opposite of what I was thinking in order to be able to change my mind. If I had just focused on spaciousness or the nature of the mind, or I don't think it would have been enough.
Could you see
that? It would not be the right how you say that, it would not have been, oh my gosh, looking for the word. I would never have opposed my wrong thinking, right? I would have kept wrong thinking, and then I can meditate on the lucidity of my wrong thinking, but then I still don't have the correct thinking.
Could you see the two as complementary? Because through the experiential, it sort of illuminates what the theory is trying to express, and the two.
Well, they're not contradictory, but if you look into how there is a book that describes the levels of practice. And so the first, I think there are 9 levels of practice, and the Dzogchen is the 9th level of practice. And then before that, there is the Vajrayana, and then before that is the Mahayana, and then before that is the Hinayana. And then they have different levels within the Hinayana and different within the Mahayana. And that all has practices with it that are suitable for someone with a mind that has affinity with these practices, right? And there are many people who say the Hinayana path is the perfect full path, Then there are people who say, no, you need to do the Mahayana to have a perfect full path. And then there are people who say, oh, but if you haven't done the Dzogchen, you haven't really realized what is to be realized. What do I know? I don't know, I don't know. I think the Buddhist path brings for everyone what people need. So everyone goes their own path. And I don't believe there is the best path, I think for everyone there is a path, and everyone has their own path, right? And everyone meets their teachers. I cannot say my teacher is a better teacher than this teacher. I just have a connection with my teacher, which is of a quality that it benefits my mind a lot. So for me, that person is at this moment in time the best teacher. But that's not an inherently existent best teacher, right? It is so dependent on so many causes and conditions. And so what I think is beautiful, that when people just walk their path, and see what they meet on that path, because that suits their mind best, right? If I hear about a teacher and I have the feeling I have to go there, then I have a connection with that person. But I hear also names from teachers and I think it's not doing anything, And sometimes I think maybe I'm missing out when I'm not going. But if the feeling is not there, how can I go? Right? And I realize that my answer might be very deluded. I don't know. I really don't know.
Oh, thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I still have a little meditation on the mind, which I really would like to do, but I see that Sunny has the hand up. Can I listen to your question, Sunny? You need to unmute.
Okay, thank you, Venerable. Quick question. The 9 types of practice that you're talking about going, where is that found? Is
Yeah,
it
I
a book?
can't remember the book. I read that long time ago in a book. Maybe the book from Robert Thurman on Tibetan Buddhism. Maybe it wasn't that, but I'm not sure.
Okay,
I'm not sure. We
Right,
could try
thank
to
you.
Google it and try to find them, but yeah.
thank you.
It's just that, you know, we need to realize that Dzogchen is not an easy practice. It can sound very easy, but it is extremely difficult to put into practice. Knowing the whole perspective of why you practice like that, you know. I always feel like it is a little bit like calm abiding. In order to achieve calm abiding, we need to have so many prerequisites to even start a practice. And so when we don't have them, we never want to go into that retreat, you know. If there is still attachment in the mind, too much attachment, I never gonna make it, right? So I need to already have done a lot of work in order for me to be able to have the wish to do such a retreat and then to be successful doing such a retreat. Same with Dzogchen. I need so many conditions in order to be able to practice just that, you know. And if your mind is not satisfied with that, I would say it's not your practice, not yet, you know, you maybe have to do first something else. All right. Okay. Shall we do a
Wonderful. Venerable, one more question about that. Would Zen be in one of the Mahayana levels? Zen Buddhism and
No, I don't think it says Zen. Lama Zopa doesn't like Zen. He said to me, they're nihilist. They're nihilist. They think nothing exists. And I was like, oh, no, Lama Zopa, it's not like that. They just say this and this. He says, no, no, no. And he was like, because I'm not sure how they say it. I do not know enough about Zen, you know. But he said they believe that nothing exists. It's all coming from the mind, totally coming from the mind. Is that true? Yeah. And so according to the Prasangika, things do exist, you know, external objects do exist. The way we see them comes from the mind. But there is an object that is in the external world. So he felt like, but you know, that doesn't mean that therefore Zen is not in this list. I didn't think it was about, you know, Theravada or Zen or anything like that. I can try to find it, and if I find it, I will send it to Sheila and she can send it to people around. Okay. All right. Let's do the meditation. Otherwise, I'm going to be late again, like yesterday.
Very quick request. The 2 sheets. Could you share them with us through maybe?
Sure.
Sheila?
Sure.
Yeah. Thank you
Yeah,
very
yeah,
much.
yeah. Yes. You mean the ones that we did the screen sharing? Yes, sure.
Yes.
Sheila can send it to you.
I can send them out after class. I'll send them to everybody.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's do a meditation. And we're going to do a meditation on the mind, observing the feelings, observing the attachment and aversion. So make yourself comfortable. And find a posture that is for you suitable to do the meditation. And whether you sit on the floor, on a cushion, or whether you sit on a chair or on the couch, that is all good. Wherever you feel your mind can relax and your mind can focus. And so when you feel that you have a posture that is suitable to your meditation, be aware of your whole body. Your body sitting. And when you feel relaxed, then bring your awareness to your abdomen, observing the rising and falling every time when you breathe in and breathe out. You breathe naturally, and you can observe the length of your breath, the length of your in-breath, the length of your out-breath. And however they happen naturally, it's just perfect. Have an open mind during the meditation. An open mind means that we accept whatever arises, which means that there is no aversion in the mind. Think about that. And if we have no expectations of what might come, then there is no attachment in the mind. And when we bring our mind to the present moment, we can see the impermanent nature of things. We can see feelings arising in the mind and dissolving back into the mind. We can observe our mind reacting to the feelings. And if we don't follow this reaction, we can see that that reaction naturally dissolves back into the mind. Being mindful gives us the opportunity to see the transit nature of everything. everything that arises naturally dissolves again. We can learn about impermanence on an intellectual level. But when we start to see and know the impermanent nature through experience, it will affect our mind in a deep way. It will affect how we perceive and engage with ourselves in the world. When we see impermanence, really see it, naturally there is no clinging to pleasant experiences and no aversion to unpleasant experiences. Because we realize there is nothing to hold on to. Everything passes away by itself. Feeling arises in every moment of mind. When pleasant feelings arise in the mind, we react with attachment. And this is our attempt to re-experience the pleasant feeling. The way we perceive it is that we first need attachment before we can experience pleasure. So we think if I have to give up my attachment, I have to give up my pleasure. But this is not true. When we give up attachment, we experience more and more full the pleasure. When we follow attachment, there is always something missing, or we want more, or we want something different. For instance, when we have been sitting for a while, we want to stand up. And once we stand up, we want to walk. We constantly keep moving. There is never contentment. This is because the nature of attachment is that it cannot give you satisfaction. This is suffering. When pleasant feelings arise, instead of following it, try to step back and give it some space by being mindful by being in the present moment. Then you will not be carried away by the feeling and you stop clinging to it. When we practice contentment, we accept what is, or we accept what we have. So then there is no attachment. And when there is no attachment, there is no dissatisfaction. And then the mind starts to become peaceful. So now let's look at the unpleasant feelings. When unpleasant feelings arise, we react with aversion. This is our attempt not to experience the unpleasant feeling. We deny or ignore or suppress unpleasant feelings. Or we distract ourselves and indulge in unpleasant activities. And then we think that we are relaxing. However, by rejecting the unpleasant feelings, they become stronger. A better way to relax is to become mindful of the unpleasant feeling. Instead of trying to escape from the unpleasant feeling, we're trying to look at it. When we're mindful of the unpleasant feeling, we can understand the nature of things. We can understand the impermanence of things. So then when things happen, we know to let go. We don't get disturbed when we lose something or when things change. The mind that is undisturbed by loss or harm is the mind of patience. When pain or suffering occurs, it becomes quickly huge because we are so focused on ourselves, but also because we resist the pain. To counteract that, we can think of more suffering. For instance, we can think, my suffering is nothing compared to the suffering of others. Or we can say, instead of pushing it away, I'm just going to take it on. We let go of our resistance and we say, I'll take it. The moment that we realize what suffering is, the moment we can experience the unpleasant feeling without resisting it, peace begins. And that peace comes from knowledge. It comes as soon as we understand. The moment we understand that we are afraid or worried, we can accept it. And when we accept it, it doesn't become bigger. And then try to recollect what was most helpful for you in this meditation. And maybe you want to come back to that later again, practice it again. So you can promise that to yourself. And with that, we bring the meditation to a conclusion. And the beauty of these meditations on the nature of the mind are that we can come back to them at any time, again and again and again. And every time that we do it, we see something different in the mind. And every time we look into the nature of our own mind, we see different aspects and we gain different understandings. We learn how our mind works. We learn about ourselves. We learn about the nature of phenomena, the nature of our mind. And so when we learn in this way, our wisdom will grow. And when the wisdom grows, we are less under the control of the delusions. We become more free. When we are more free, we are more happy. We are more easy. For ourselves and also for others. And then we can conclude this meditation session, but also this teaching session by dedicating all the positive energy that we have created today and yesterday. We can dedicate it to the happiness and the welfare of all sentient beings. We can also read the dedication prayers if we want. Yes, we can do that together. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Let's do that last one too, to remember to realize emptiness. Due to the merits of the 3 times collected by me, Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and sentient beings, which are totally non-existent from their own side. May the I, which is totally non-existent from its own side, achieve Guru Shakyamuni Buddha's enlightenment, which is also totally non-existent from its own side. I lead all sentient beings who are non-existent from their own side to that enlightenment, which is totally non-existent from its own side, by myself alone, who is also totally non-existent from its own side. Thank you very much.